The rain pounded against the city streets like a relentless drumbeat, a rhythmic reminder of the storm raging within Aiden's soul. He sat on the edge of a crumbling bridge, staring down at the dark waters below. The wind howled around him, whispering cruel lies in his ears. You failed. You have nothing left. No one cares. No one will miss you. Aiden used to believe he was meant for something great. He had dreams, big, audacious dreams, of success, of love, of making a difference in the world. But dreams, he had learned, were fragile things, easily shattered by the weight of reality. His company had crumbled overnight, drowning him in debt. His so-called friends had vanished the moment he needed them most. His family? Gone. His father had walked out years ago. His mother, the only constant in his life, had lost her battle to cancer 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but an empty apartment and memories that clawed at his heart. And then there was Maya. Maya had been his anchor, the one who made him believe in love, in hope, until the day she walked away. I can't do this anymore, Aiden, she had whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. You're drowning, and I can't drown with you. Those words had crushed him more than any financial loss ever could. He wasn't just broken. He was hollow, a shell of the man he used to be. Now he sat here on this rusting bridge, drenched and exhausted, the weight of failure pressed against his chest like a vice. He leaned forward slightly, staring at the abyss below. It would be so easy. One step, one breath, one moment, and the pain would be over. But something inside him resisted. A flicker, a whisper, a memory. You're stronger than you think, Aiden. His mother's voice, soft but unyielding. She used to say that to him whenever he doubted himself as a child, when he had scraped his knees learning to ride a bike, when he had failed his first big exam, when he had cried after his father left. He clenched his fists, shaking his head. No, that voice was gone. That strength was gone. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing his turmoil. He closed his eyes, letting the rain mix with the tears he refused to acknowledge. And then, as if the universe wasn't done punishing him, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it. But something, curiosity, irritation, or maybe that last thread of hope, made him glance at the screen. A message from an unknown number. Aiden, I know you're hurting, but this is not the end. It never was. The phoenix always rises. His breath caught, his body tensed. He looked around, scanning the empty street. The world was silent except for the rain. Who was this? How did they know? His fingers trembled as he typed a reply. Who is this? 3 dots appeared, flickered, and then a response. Someone who believes in you. Step away from the edge. This is just the beginning. Aiden's heart pounded against his ribs. His mind screamed at him to ignore it, to give into the darkness. But another part of him, one he thought had died long ago, whispered something else. Listen. His mother's words echoed again. You're stronger than you think. With a slow, unsteady breath, Aiden shifted back, away from the ledge, away from the abyss. The phone buzzed once more. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., the old cafe on 5th. If you still believe there's nothing left, I won't stop you. But if even a part of you wants to fight, show up. Aiden exhaled shakily. He wasn't sure if he wanted to fight, but maybe, just maybe, he wasn't ready to lose just yet. He stood up, wiping the rain from his face, and took a step back towards solid ground. The phoenix always rises. And maybe, just maybe, so could he. The rain lashed against the cracked window pane, drumming a sorrowful rhythm against the glass. Arian sat hunched over in the dimly lit room, his fingers tracing the edges of an old photograph. It was a picture of his family, his mother's warm smile, his father's protective arm around his shoulders. But that was a lifetime ago. Now, the photograph was a relic of a past that no longer existed. The weight of failure pressed down on his chest. His dreams had crumbled, leaving him with nothing but regret and a deep, gnawing emptiness. He had tried, oh, how he had tried, to prove himself. But life had a way of dragging him back into the abyss every time he fought to climb out. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years he whispered aloud, I'd give up. Just as the words left his lips, a strange rustling filled the room. He turned sharply. The room was empty, yet the air felt charged with something unseen. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, his gaze landed on a leather-bound journal resting on the bookshelf. He didn't remember ever seeing it before. Hesitantly, he reached for it, the leather soft and warm beneath his fingertips. The pages smelled of time itself, their edges frayed and yellowed. As he flipped through them, he found words written in an elegant, flowing script. You are not alone. Your struggle has a purpose. Rise. A chill ran down Arian's spine. His hands trembled. Who had written this? And why did it feel like these words were meant for him? The ink had faded, yet the message burned with an intensity that struck deep into his soul. He shook his head. No, he muttered. This is just a coincidence. But the words clung to him like an unshakable shadow. He closed the journal, placed it back on the shelf, and turned away. Yet, as he sat down on his bed, he found himself repeating the words in his mind. The rain lashed against the cracked window pane, drumming a sorrowful rhythm against the glass. Arian sat hunched over in the dimly lit room, his fingers tracing the edges of an old photograph. It was a picture of his family. His mother's warm smile, his father's protective arm around his shoulders. But that was a lifetime ago. Now, the photograph was a relic of a past that no longer existed. The weight of failure pressed down on his chest. His dreams had crumbled, leaving him with nothing but regret and a deep, gnawing emptiness. He had tried, oh, how he had tried, to prove himself. But life had a way of dragging him back into the abyss every time he fought to climb out. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years, he whispered aloud, I give up. Just as the words left his lips, a strange rustling filled the room. He turned sharply. The room was empty, yet the air felt charged with something unseen. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, his gaze landed on a leather-bound journal resting on the bookshelf. He didn't remember ever seeing it before. Hesitantly, he reached for it, the leather soft and warm beneath his fingertips. The pages smelled of time itself, their edges frayed and yellowed. As he flipped through them, he found words written in an elegant, flowing script. You are not alone. Your struggle has a purpose. Rise. A chill ran down Arian's spine. His hands trembled. Who had written this? And why did it feel like these words were meant for him? The ink had faded, yet the message burned with an intensity that struck deep into his soul. He shook his head. No, he muttered. This is just a coincidence. But the words clung to him like an unshakable shadow. He closed the journal, placed it back on the shelf, and turned away. Yet, as he sat down on his bed, he found himself repeating the words in his mind. The evening air carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Arian sat by his window, staring at the journal that had found its way into his life. The words inside had breathed hope into him, but hope was fragile. It flickered like a candle caught in the wind, threatening to go out at any moment. He turned to a fresh page and hesitated before writing. Maybe, just maybe, I can try again. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, a step forward. For years, he had drowned in the belief that he was destined to fail. Every setback had convinced him that life had already decided his fate. But now, a part of him whispered otherwise. A part of him believed, however faintly, that his pain was not the end of the story. And so he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would try again. Morning arrived with the scent of damp earth, the remnants of last night's rain still glistening on the pavement. Arian walked into a small cafe, clutching a portfolio of his artwork. He had once dreamed of being an artist, but life had worn that dream down to dust. Still, something pushed him forward. The cafe owner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, flipped through his work in silence. Finally, she looked up. These are beautiful, raw, emotional, but we're looking for something different, something modern and upbeat. Arian swallowed hard. I understand. Thank you for your time. As he stepped out, disappointment gnawed at him. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but rejection still stung. His footsteps fell heavier with each step, self-doubt creeping back like an old enemy. You're wasting your time, a voice in his mind sneered. You'll never make it. Just stop trying. Arian clenched his fists. He couldn't let the past win. Not this time. Over the next week, he took more small steps. He applied for jobs. He reached out to galleries. He even painted again, his first real painting in years. It was a self-portrait, but not of the man he was now. It was of the man he wanted to become. Yet, with every step forward, something pulled him back. That something had a name. Kabir, Arian's former best friend. Once, they had been inseparable, but life had pushed them onto different paths. Kabir had risen, built a successful career, while Arian had crumbled under the weight of his struggles. They hadn't spoken in years, until now. Arian, the voice came from behind him as he left an art studio, another rejection in his hands. He turned to see Kabir, confident, polished, and every bit the man Aryan had once hoped to be. "Kabir," Aryan managed. Kabir's gaze flickered over him, taking in the worn-out shoes, the tired eyes. "It's been a long time. How have you been?" Aryan forced a smile. "I'm getting back on my feet, trying to make something of my art." Kabir sighed, shaking his head. "Still chasing that dream? Come on, Aryan. You need to be practical. The world doesn't reward dreamers." A familiar bitterness coiled in Aryan's chest. "I thought you used to believe in me." "I did," Kabir said, "back when we were kids. But we're not kids anymore. Life isn't about passion. It's about survival. Let it go. Find something stable. Move on." Aryan swallowed the anger rising in his throat. He had expected doubt from himself, from strangers, but not from someone who had once been his closest friend. As Kabir walked away, Aryan's shoulders slumped. The shadows of his past loomed over him once more. That night, he sat in front of his half-finished painting, staring at the man on the canvas. He had painted strength, resilience, but he didn't feel those things. Instead, he felt like the same broken person he had always been. He picked up the brush, then set it down again. His hands shook. What was the point? Maybe Kabir was right. Maybe he was chasing something that had never been meant for him. Doubt was a powerful enemy. It whispered in the quiet. It gnawed at the soul. It made even the brightest light seem dim. "Why are you doing this?" The voice in his mind whispered. "You'll never be good enough. You'll never make it. Just stop." The temptation to give in was strong. But then he remembered something. You are not alone. Your struggle has a purpose. Rise. The old man's words. The journal's message. The whisper of hope that had found him when he had least expected it. Slowly, he picked up the brush again. "One step at a time," he murmured. He dipped the brush into deep, bold colors and let them spill onto canvas. The strokes were uncertain at first, but with every movement, the doubt faded. He painted through the fear, through the pain, through the voices telling him to stop. And by the time dawn broke, the painting was complete. A phoenix rising from the ashes. Because that's what he was meant to do. The sky was painted in hues of crimson and gold as Aryan stood at the edge of the rooftop, watching the city breathe below him. He inhaled deeply, the air thick with the scent of rain and distant street food. This city had seen him break. It had witnessed his failures, his pain, and his slow descent into darkness. But tonight, something was different. He had spent weeks fighting his doubts, pushing against the walls that had caged him for so long. Every day had been a battle. Rejections, old wounds, and haunting voices had tried to pull him back into despair. But a whisper of hope had kept him standing. And now, he was ready to embrace it fully. His phone buzzed. It was a message from an art gallery he had submitted his work to a week ago. "Aryan, we admire the raw emotion in your paintings, but unfortunately, we won't be able to feature your work at this time." Another rejection. Aryan closed his eyes. The old him would have let this break him. He would have let it confirm every negative thought he had ever believed about himself. But now, something within him burned brighter. He pulled out the worn journal, the one that had first whispered hope to him, and flipped through its pages. His fingers trembled as he reached a blank space. He had been writing his journey in it, documenting his fight against the darkness. And tonight, he had something new to write. Every fall is a setup for a stronger comeback. The words formed with conviction, with fire. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first found this journal. He had fallen 1,000 times, but now he understood he was meant to rise. The next morning, Aryan made a decision. If he was going to rebuild his life, he needed to strengthen not just his mind, but his body and spirit. He would train like a warrior. He would forge himself in fire and emerge unbreakable. He started running. At first, his body protested. His legs ached, his lungs burned, and sweat dripped down his face. But he pushed forward. Step after step, he silenced the voice that told him to stop. He fell. He stumbled. But each time he got back up, he sought out knowledge. He studied philosophy, the stories of warriors, of leaders who had risen from nothing. He learned about the phoenix, the mythical bird that burned only to be reborn stronger. It wasn't just a story, it was a philosophy, a way of life, the phoenix rise. It wasn't about never falling. It was about embracing the fall, using the fire's struggle to fuel the ascent. Aryan repeated it to himself every day. One evening, as he trained in an old boxing gym, he met someone who would change his life forever. "You punch like a man carrying the weight of the world," a deep voice called out. Aryan turned to see an older man watching him. His presence commanded respect, scarred knuckles, sharp eyes, a body that spoke of decades of battle. I used to fight professionally, the man continued. Now, I train those who have fire but no direction. And you, kid, you have fire. Arian hesitated. I don't know if I have what it takes. The man smirked. Nobody does. Until they do, train with me, and I'll show you what's already inside you. And so, Arian trained, not just his body, but his mind. He learned discipline, strategy, and the art of resilience. His mentor, whom everyone called Coach, drilled lessons into him with every punch thrown, every bead of sweat spilled. Pain is temporary, Coach would say. Weakness is temporary. But your will? That's what determines if you rise or stay on the ground. Every hit Arian took, every fall he endured, fueled him. He wasn't just fighting in the ring. He was fighting the demons of his past. He was rewriting the story that had once defined him. Months passed, and one day, Arian received a message that made his heart pound. An underground art exhibition had seen his work. They wanted him to showcase his paintings. He stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. This was it, his chance. But along with excitement, fear crept in. What if I fail? The doubt was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But this time, he had an answer. Then I will rise again. The night of the exhibition arrived. The venue was raw, industrial. Concrete walls adorned with vibrant artwork, the air thick with anticipation. Arian stood before his section, heart pounding. His paintings told his story. Each stroke of color, each shadowed figure, each burst of light was a testament to his journey. The pain, the struggle, the hope, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. People gathered around his work. Some stared in silence. Some whispered to each other. And then, something incredible happened. A man approached him, eyes glistening. This speaks to me, he said. I've been in that darkness. And seeing this, it makes me believe I can climb out. Arian's breath caught. He had once been a man seeking hope, searching for something to pull him out of the abyss. And now, his story was doing that for someone else. This was his purpose. He wasn't just an artist. He was a phoenix. As the night wound down, Arian stepped outside. The cool air a welcome contrast to the heat of the event. He looked up at the stars, their light unwavering in the dark sky. He had thought his struggle was a curse, that his failures defined him. But now he knew the truth. Every fall had been a lesson. Every failure had been fuel. He had burned. He had been reduced to ashes. But from those ashes, he had risen, and he would keep rising, because that was the way of the phoenix. The city skyline stretched before Arian like a vast ocean of lights, shimmering under the weight of the night. He stood at the edge of the rooftop, feeling the cold wind bite into his skin. This was where he had once questioned his existence, where he had nearly let the darkness consume him. But not tonight. Tonight, he stood not as a man defeated, but as one who had risen from the ashes. His journey had been long, marked by wounds both seen and unseen. He had trained his body, his mind, and his soul. He had learned that pain was not his enemy. It was his teacher. And now, as he prepared to face his greatest challenge yet, he knew that everything had led to this moment. T started with a phone call. Arian, it's your mother. The words hit like a punch to the gut. His mother, his anchor, the woman who had always believed in him even when he had stopped believing in himself, was in the hospital. A sudden illness, the doctor said. Time was uncertain. For the first time in months, fear gripped him again. The kind of fear that paralyzed, that made breathing feel impossible. He rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sight of her lying there, frail and weak, shattered him. Ma, he whispered, taking her hand. She opened her eyes, a weak smile on her lips. My phoenix, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Tears welled in his eyes. Don't call me that now. Just get better. Please. Her fingers curled around his. You have risen from worse, Arian, and you will rise again. Her words echoed through him, igniting something deep within. He had fought for himself, but now he had to fight for her. He barely left the hospital over the next few days. His mind was a battlefield, torn between hope and despair. And then, just when he thought he was at his limit, the past came knocking. Didn't expect to see me, did you? Arian turned to the voice and felt his stomach drop. Kabir, the friend-turned-stranger who had once told him to abandon his dreams. The man who had looked at him with disappointment, with pity. What are you doing here? Arian asked, his voice calm but firm. Kabir shrugged. I heard about your mother. Thought you might need some real advice for once. Arian clenched his fists. If you're here to tell me to give up again, save your breath. Kabir smirked. Give up? No. But look at yourself, Arian. You're stuck in the same cycle. Pain, struggle, trying to prove yourself. For what? Life doesn't care how much you fight. It will always knock you back down. Arian's heart pounded. The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they were the kind of poison he had once believed in. You're wrong, Arian said, his voice steady. Pain is my enemy. It's my fuel. Every fall I've taken has made me stronger. I don't break, Kabir. I rise. Kabir chuckled, shaking his head. You always were stubborn. I just hope you're not setting yourself up for another fall. As he walked away, Arian took a deep breath. The old him might have wavered, might have let doubt creep in. But not now. Not ever again. Days turned into weeks. His mother's condition remained critical, but Arian refused to let the fear consume him. He trained harder, pushed himself further. If life was testing him, he would answer with fire. Then, the moment came, a call from the underground art community. A final test, a massive exhibition, featuring only the most powerful, most transformative works. The kind that didn't just tell a story, but changed lives. Are you ready? The organizer asked. Arian thought his mother of every wound, every scar, every night spent battling his demons. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who almost gave up. I'm ready. The exhibition was unlike anything he had ever seen. Art that bled, that roared, that whispered secrets only the soul could understand. Arian stood before his work, his heart hammering in his chest. His piece was simple yet powerful, a canvas split into two halves. One side, pure darkness, a silhouette of a man drowning in shadows. The other, a figure engulfed in flames, wings of fire spreading wide. The phoenix rising. It was his story, his battle, his truth. People stopped, stared, some with awe, some with tears in their eyes. And then, a voice spoke behind him. It's breathtaking. Arian turned and found himself face to face with a man he recognized from magazines, from news articles. A renowned artist, a mentor to legends. This isn't just art, the man continued. This is survival. This is rebirth. Arian swallowed hard. It's my life. The man nodded. I want to showcase your work. Not just here, but worldwide. Your journey, your resilience needs to be seen. Are you ready to rise to the next level? Arian felt the fire in his chest. The same fire that had burned through his despair, through every voice that told him he couldn't. He met the man's gaze and smiled. I was born to rise. The night ended with a call from the hospital. His mother had taken a turn for the better. The doctors were stunned. She's fighting, they said. She's not giving up. Arian closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. Neither will I. He stepped out into the night, inhaling the crisp air. The battle against darkness had tested him one last time, but it had failed to break him, because he was no longer the man who feared to fall. He was a phoenix, and he would always rise. The first rays of the sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson as Arian stood at the highest point of the city, his city. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain, and the world below bustled with life. It was the same place where he had once felt trapped, drowning in despair. But today, he stood different, reborn, transformed. Months had passed since the night of his greatest test. His mother had recovered, and though she still had a long road ahead, she smiled more now. She had called him her phoenix, and for the first time, he had truly believed it. He had fought battles within himself and against the world, but now he was no longer just surviving. He was thriving. His art had gained recognition. His story had traveled farther than he could have ever imagined. People reached out to him, some broken, some lost, some standing at the very edge he had once known so well. And to each of them, he offered the same message. You are not alone. Your struggle has a purpose. Rise. One evening, he found himself back at the boxing gym, the place where he had forged his strength. The familiar scent of sweat and effort clung to the air as fists pounded against punching bags. Coach stood in the corner, observing him as he landed a perfect strike. You fight differently now, Coach said, arms crossed. Arian wiped the sweat from his brow. How so? Coach smirked. Before, you fought like a man trying to prove something. Now you fight like a man who already knows his worth. Arian chuckled. Maybe because I finally do. Coach studied him for a moment. You've come a long way, kid. But tell me, what's next? The question lingered in the air. What was next? Arian had spent so much time fighting to escape his past that he had never truly thought about his future. But now, for the first time, he had a vision beyond survival. "I want to help others rise," he said with certainty. "I want to use my story to pull people out of the darkness, the way I pulled myself out." Coach nodded approvingly. "Then do it. But remember, leading others out of fire means being willing to walk through it again. You ready for that?" Arian met his mentor's gaze, fire burning in his own. "I was born for it." The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. An organization that worked with struggling youth invited him to speak at an event. They wanted him to share his journey, to show that pain did not have to be the end of the story. He stood backstage, heart pounding. He had fought battles in the ring, against rejection, against the demons of his past. But this, standing in front of people who saw him as hope, this was a different kind of fight. The announcer called his name. The crowd applauded as he stepped onto stage, his hands gripping the microphone. He took a deep breath, scanning the faces before him. Some were hopeful, some were skeptical. Some carried the same haunted look he once had in his own reflection. "I was once where you are now," he began, his voice steady. "Lost, broken, wondering if it was even worth trying anymore. I let failure define me. I let pain bury me. But then I realized something." He paused, allowing the silence to draw them in. "Pain is not the end. Pain is the beginning of transformation. Every fall, every failure, every scar, it's fuel. It's the fire that forges you into something stronger. The world will try to break you, but the only thing that matters is this. Will you rise?" A hushed silence fell over the room, and then one by one, people began to clap, not out of politeness, but because they felt it, they understood it, because they, too, were searching for a reason to rise. As Arian stepped off the stage, a young man approached him. His hands trembled, and his eyes were filled with unspoken pain. "I was going to give up today," the young man admitted. "But hearing you, it made me think that maybe I don't have to." Arian placed a hand on his shoulder, looking him in the eye. "You don't. Your story isn't over. You're just at the part where you rise." The days turned into weeks, and Arian's mission grew. He spoke to more people, guided those who needed a spark to ignite their own fire. His past demons still whispered sometimes, but now he knew how to answer them. Then, one evening, a familiar figure appeared. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Arian said, folded his arms as Kabir approached him. His former friend looked different, less arrogant, more uncertain. "I saw your speech," Kabir admitted. "You really believe all that? That people can change." Arian met his gaze. "I don't just believe it. I've lived it." Kabir exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been lost too, for a long time. I thought pushing people down made me stronger, but it didn't. It just made me emptier." For a long time, Arian had resented Kabir, but standing here now, he saw him not as an enemy, but as another person trying to find his way. "Then rise, Kabir," Arian said simply. "It's not too late. It never is." For the first time, Kabir's eyes filled with something Arian had never seen in him before. Hope. The sun began to set, casting the world in golden light. Arian stood once more on the rooftop, looking out over the city that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like home. He had fallen. He had burned. But from those ashes, he had built something unstoppable. He had become more than a survivor. He had become a beacon. He had become the phoenix. And to anyone still lost in the darkness, he had one message. Rise.